Hey, it's Tom from Tom's Toons. This is something that you may have thought about on your boat, but maybe didn't know how to approach it. We're talking about the deck trim around the outside of your boat that sits on top of the flooring. So you've got new flooring on your boat, you're putting new furniture up, but what does your deck trim look like? This is an option to make your old boat have that new finish with new deck trim. On this project, we are to the point now where we've got the floor on, we've got our furniture up, we're gonna get the railings on soon, but we need to address the outside of our pontoon decking. The vinyl, the plywood, we're gonna cover that, we need to protect it. And that's what this is for. Some people call it a rub rail or deck trim. Same thing, it just covers and it has a nice aesthetic look. This is the deck trim from PontoonStuff.com. You can use Tom's Toons, all one word, at checkout to save 5% on your order. This comes in 8-foot long pieces, so easy to match up and figure out how much you're gonna need for your boat. The first step is measuring the length, the total length of your deck. So when I order that, I know I need one full piece for the front, one full piece for the back, we're at 2, and then for each side, I need about 20 feet worth or just under. So what I do in that case is I order 2 full for each side. So now I'm up to 6 total, and then I can get 1 more, and I'm gonna actually cut that down, and I'll use the factory edge on the inside, or forward facing, we'll get there in a minute, it'll make more sense, and then I can use the edge I cut, because it might not be perfect, on the back, where the corner cap is gonna cover. When I get into position here, and I've got all my pieces ready to go, I'm gonna start with the front on every boat. So my front piece, the reason I'm not gonna break this down super detailed is every corner cap might be different. Every boat might have a different wider radius, smaller radius, squared off. It could be a number of different corner caps that's gonna dictate exactly how long your front piece needs to be. So we're not gonna get into crazy detail there, but I will tell you, this is a corner cap from PontoonStuff.com, their wide radius option. When I do this, it cuts in about 8 inches into the deck on each side. This is an 8-foot wide boat. So my front piece of deck trim was roughly 80 inches, just about. And then what I do to tie it up is I go ahead and I come in 2 inches and up about 1 inch, and I cut at an angle, and that way there's no edge hanging down. It's a nice smooth transition, and it looks nice too. Once I've got my front piece in and my corner cap mocked up, knowing about where it's gonna go, I can then move to the first piece back. I'm gonna try to keep it in full lengths, 8-foot pieces from front to back. If I'm gonna have a seam that's shorter, I'd rather that be in the back where I'm not gonna see it every time I get on and off the boat. I get my front piece mocked up where it needs to go, and what I do on each side is I measure from the back of the boat forward, so back corner forward to the end of this first piece. If you come over here, I line it up so I come exactly the same on each side. If I was off by a 1/2 inch, it wouldn't be the end of the world, but I like it to be even. That way, when I get to mocking everything up, I can pull my second piece in. When we bolt this down in a second here, it'll flush these up nicely, and the railing is gonna sit on half of it anyway, so you won't really notice that seam. Then as we move farther back, you'll see that I'm gonna be left with just under 4 feet, probably closer to 3 feet, and I'll cut it to size, and I'll put the factory edge against the factory edge here, and then the other side will leave a couple inches. We'll get to that when we fit up the back. So now I've got my front together. I'm gonna start working my way back on these full pieces. When I get here, I'll get this one secured, and then for this last piece, I'm gonna cut it about 2 inches short. Then I can get to fitting the back with the back corner caps. So let's get to securing these now. I've got this front piece of deck trim installed up front. I've got a bolt holding it in the front. So I'm gonna move to where we're seaming the next 8-foot piece together like so. I'm gonna start with the front one, and what I'm gonna do is just push in. I'm gonna make sure there's nothing underneath here, because if there was a cross member right out, I wanna make sure, even if I have to go through the cross member, I wanna make sure that I have access to the bottom side where my nut and bolt are gonna go. So what I'm gonna do is drill a 1/4 inch hole. We're gonna come in about 1 inch, and right in the middle, And I'm going to drill this all the way through the deck trim and the plywood deck. I'm using 1.25 inches. You could use 1.5 inches. This is a Phillips number 3 head. This is a machine screw. It's stainless steel. Definitely do stainless steel on these. I get these at the local hardware store if you need to. But again, stainless steel is a must here. A stainless steel fender washer and a locking nut. So it's a nylock nut because we never want these to vibrate or come loose. On the bottom side, you might have to chip away some of the wood, the plywood that breaks off when you drill your hole. And then I'm just gonna get this hand tightened for now. And on this size nut bolt combination, it's just gonna catch the nylon of the nut to lock it in place. So now with that there, I'm gonna line up my next one back to make that seam as flush as possible, and I'm gonna drill a hole the same way. And then I'm gonna hand tighten, and the reason I'm gonna hand tighten these is so that I can get them nice and flush. So I'm gonna tighten down the front one first, just get it started to where that nylock is grabbing. If I crank super tight or use an impact or something, I might end up denting this or leaving the stress marks on it from over tightening. These are anodized, so they already have a finish to them, just an anodized finish. If I push down too much, you're gonna see some stress lines in there from over tightening. So my job on this other side is just to get this nice and flush to where I can run my finger and not catch. And then there might be a little bit of adjustment on the bottom, just moving them. And you could add a back plate, it's not included, but you could grab a piece of 1/8 inch aluminum and use it, just a little rectangle that would fit on the back side here, and you could rivet just to hold those together. I've never had it be a problem. If I don't rivet them together, I've never had them catch or get bent out or anything, but that would be one thing you could add if you wanted that extra level of protection. So I've got my seam together here, tightened down. I'm gonna go back forward now, and I'm gonna put in one more of those machine screws at the halfway point, just to help hold everything down, because you can see it moves right now. So we're gonna go halfway back and lock it in here. Whenever I do this, I make sure I push that deck trim in tight to the edge of the plywood, and then I can drill through. Gonna get on that. I'm not gonna over tighten it to dimple it in. I'm just gonna get it to where those threads can catch on the nut, on the nylock part of it, and then we're good to go. So let's move back. We've got our back section cut ready. Let's go take a peek at that. So if you come around the back, this is where every boat is unique. Keep that in mind. I am gonna use the more square radius corner cap for the rear. So I've made sure I know what that's gonna cover. And what I've done for this rear piece is I've cut it down, so I've left 2.5 inches from the side here, and then this back piece of deck trim for the side of the boat, when that's installed, it's also gonna be 2.5 inches. When I put this corner cap on, it's gonna cover where everything comes together. It's a really nice clean look. I did have to drill my hole here. Make sure again that you have access on the bottom side. Sometimes there's a cross member right to the back and can be challenging. If you look at this back piece, this is where every boat is different. I had to notch out my deck trim to get around the eyelet, or the, I guess you call it stern eye or lifting eye of the pontoon. It's common to have to trim up around the transom. That's gonna interfere. This was hitting there. And then I had to notch out the other pontoon right above it for that. We're gonna go back up now. This is just all fit up, is making sure that our sides and our rear are gonna come together properly. Now I'm ready to put my last side piece on, and then we'll come to the back. Just like I did before, I'm gonna drill my full length, my forward piece first. I'll put a bolt in, and then we'll do the back. Everything's a hammer. That's a shout out to Benny D. And what I'll do is put one more on the halfway point of this center deck trim. We'll put one more in right at halfway. So on each side on the back, I'm gonna come forward 4 inches. That way we're plenty clear of the corner cap. And And we're gonna do one more bolt through right here to hold everything in place. With that 2.5 inch gap here, I am gonna go ahead and just anchor down this back piece. I've run a couple machine screws towards the center just to hold this in place so it can't move as I'm working on it. So those are in. Now I can move on to my corner cap. Again, I pre-drilled that with a 1/4 inch bit, and I can get this in position here. If you're using a wider radius corner cap or the round radius, you might have to clip this corner off. That's totally fine. In this case, we don't need to because it's almost a 90-degree angle. I'm gonna get this situated, pushed in hard to the corner, and then I'm gonna go ahead and drill my hole through the deck. I'm gonna run a longer, it's the 1 3/4, same Phillips head number 3 stainless machine screw. Run that down through. It's just a thicker piece of aluminum to go through for the corner cap. And a washer and a nut on the bottom. Got that tightened down nice and tight. Remember, when you're using stainless hardware, it's a good idea, just go gentle rather than hammering away with an impact, or grease that nut or bolt machine screw so that they don't seize up. Stainless is a pretty soft metal, and I've heard a couple different theories on it, but either way, they seize up. They basically weld together, the nut and the bolt, and then you have to break it to get it apart. It's a pain in the neck, so hopefully we can save you some help. A little bit of WD-40 or anti-seizing grease, wax I've heard works too, to keep that from seizing. We've got this whole side in and ready to go. Another great way to anchor your deck trim to make it even more solid is putting your cleats through it. So we would go through the deck trim, through the deck, and then put a nice big washer on the back side or a backing plate to keep that solid. That's just another way to hold this down snug. This entire side is done with the rear corner cap, front corner cap across the back. I'm gonna tie up the other side the same way I did this, and then this boat is wrapped up for deck trim. It's ready for railings.